Detective Zabiya Rossum drove past the perfectly manicured lawns and luxurious mansions of Dunwoody, an affluent suburb of Atlanta, where even the air seemed to smell of money and privilege. Rain drummed on the roof of the police car, as if echoing her gloomy mood. A report of a crime at the Ellisons' mansion had pulled her out of her warm bed at 3 a.m. A murder, something almost unheard of in this neighborhood. She turned onto the wide driveway in front of the imposing stone and glass mansion. Despite the late hour, the house was lit up, and police cars and ambulances crowded the driveway. A patrol officer had already stretched yellow tape around the perimeter. "Detective Rossum," she introduced herself, showing her badge to the young officer who was shifting nervously at the entrance. "Dawson, ma'am. The body is on the 2nd floor in the study. The medical examiner is already there." The young man's voice trembled. "The suspect is also at the scene. He called and confessed himself." "How long have you been on patrol, Dawson?" Zabiya asked, noticing the pallor on the officer's face. "3 months, ma'am." "First murder?" He nodded. "It's okay. You get used to everything," she said, even though she knew it was a lie. "Some things you can't get used to." In the spacious living room, she was greeted by a buzz of voices and bustle. A couple of forensic scientists in gloves were examining the marble staircase. A man sat on a luxurious sofa, his head between his knees. His white shirt was splattered with blood, and handcuffs glinted on his wrists. Another officer, clearly more experienced than the nervous Dawson at the entrance, sat nearby. "What do we have here?" Zabiya asked, approaching her colleague. "Paxton Allison, 29 years old." The officer nodded at the man. "Co-owner of the house with his grandfather, investment analyst, called 911 at 2:15 a.m. and said he had killed his grandfather." "Jeremiah Allison, 73 years old, former prosecutor, now a partner in a law firm. Cause of death presumed to be traumatic brain injury. Medical examiner is currently working." Zabiya shifted her gaze to the young man. He slowly raised his head, and she saw empty, glassy eyes. Shock, a classic picture. "Do you want to tell me something, Paxton?" she asked, sitting down on the coffee table opposite him. "I killed him," he said monotonously. "I killed my grandfather." "Why?" "I caught him with my wife." His voice broke. A woman's crying came from the next room. Zabiya turned and saw a young woman sitting surrounded by paramedics. Her delicate face was swollen from crying, and her hands instinctively hugged her stomach, protecting her still unseen pregnancy. "Brixley," Paxton whispered, following Zabiya's gaze. "My wife. She's pregnant. 4 months." "I'll talk to her soon." Zabiya nodded, making a note in her notebook. "For now, tell me what happened." Paxton took a deep breath. "I was supposed to come back tomorrow. Business trip to Boston. But the meeting was canceled, and I decided to surprise her." His eyes clouded over. "Surprise my ass. I walked in and heard noises coming from my grandfather's study. They were there. Together." "What happened next?" "I don't remember exactly. I saw them and something inside me snapped. I lunged at him. We fought. I grabbed that damn figurine from his desk. He raised his bound hands and stared at them as if he saw blood, even though there was none on his palms. I wanted him out of my life, out of our lives." Zabiya made a few more notes. She had heard stories like this hundreds of times. Rage, betrayal, violence, the eternal companions of human passion. "Can I examine the crime scene?" she asked the officer. As she climbed the gracefully curved staircase, Zabiya glanced at the photographs on the wall. 3 generations of the Allison family. Jeremiah in his youth, a dignified man with a penetrating gaze, his late son, and young Paxton. And recent wedding photos. Paxton and Brixley, the perfect young couple. Their smiles now seemed out of place in a house permeated with the smell of death. Jeremiah's study was the embodiment of old wealth, a massive oak table, leather armchairs, walls hung with diplomas and photographs of politicians and judges. In the center of the room lay a body on the floor. The medical examiner bent over it, methodically doing his job. "How long has he been dead?" Zabiya asked, putting on gloves. "Preliminarily, about 3 hours," replied the medical examiner without looking up. "Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. I'll be more precise after the autopsy." Jeremiah Ellison was lying on his back, his gray hair mixed with blood from a wound on the back of his head. Next to him lay a massive bronze statuette of the goddess of justice, obviously the murder weapon, An ironic choice for a former prosecutor. Zabia carefully examined the room. An overturned chair, scattered papers, an overturned whiskey table. Signs of a struggle, but something didn't add up. She crouched down next to the body, studying the position of the limbs and the expression on the deceased's face. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" she asked the expert. "Other than the fact that a 73-year-old man was allegedly sleeping with his grandson's wife," he replied dryly. "Nothing that would refute your suspect's confession. The blunt head injury is consistent with a blow from this statuette. The blood spatters on your boyfriend's shirt downstairs will probably confirm that he was nearby at the time of the blow." Zabia noticed something white sticking out of the dead man's jacket pocket. She carefully pulled it out, a handkerchief with the initials IE embroidered on it and traces of lipstick. She returned downstairs. Brixley was already sitting alone, wrapped in a blanket. The paramedics had apparently decided she was fine. "Mrs. Allison? I'm Detective Zabia Rossum," she introduced herself. "I need to ask you a few questions." "I can't. Not now," Brixley whispered, her eyes wide and frightened. "My husband, Your husband confessed to killing his grandfather," Zabia said bluntly. "He claims he caught you together." Brixley flinched as if she had been slapped. "Is that true?" The young woman lowered her eyes. It's very complicated, Detective. Simplify it for me." Brixley glanced at her husband, who was being led out of the house. Their eyes met for a moment, and Zabia saw something in that look that was more than could be expected between a traitor and the betrayed. "Paxton was supposed to come back tomorrow," Brixley began. "I worked late, and then I stopped by Jeremiah's to discuss a legal matter." Her voice faltered. "He was always persistent, aggressively persistent." "You mean he coerced you?" Brixley swallowed. "I don't know what to say. It happened once, before the wedding. Jeremiah was my mentor at the law firm. He promised to help my career." Zabia narrowed her eyes. The young woman was clearly holding something back. "What happened today?" "I came to talk to him about business." Her fingers nervously crumpled the blanket. "He started making suggestive comments, became aggressive. Then Paxton showed up. I've never seen him so angry. They got into a fight and I yelled at them to stop. And then..." She covered her face with her hands. Zabia glanced at her notes, then back at the woman. "You're pregnant, right? 4 months?" When Brixley lifted her face, a strange fear flashed in her eyes. "Yes, Paxton is so happy." Was happy. Zabia suddenly remembered. The reports of the time of death did not match Paxton's story. If Jeremiah was killed between 11 and 1, and Paxton claims he returned and found them together, what was he doing in the hours leading up to the call at 911 at 2:15? At that moment, the story of the Allison family came to Zabia's mind. Jeremiah was a local legend, a brilliant prosecutor, and later a successful partner in a prestigious law firm. His only son was tragically killed in a car accident 15 years ago, along with his wife, leaving Paxton in his grandfather's care. Jeremiah raised his grandson and helped him build a career. 6 years ago, Jeremiah introduced Paxton to a young, promising lawyer, Brixley Parker, whom he personally mentored. 2 years later, they married, forming the perfect couple, according to Atlanta's society columns. Now that perfect story had ended in bloody tragedy. Zabia returned to the office, where the forensic experts were still working. She looked around the scene again, noticing details that had escaped her at first glance. The statuette, the murder weapon, lay in a strange position, not how it should have fallen from the hand of a person striking from the front in the heat of a struggle. The blood spatters on the wall also told their own story, a story that didn't quite match Paxton's testimony. She noticed an overturned bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses on the table. One was almost empty, and the other had lipstick marks on it, the same shade as the one on Jeremiah's handkerchief. Did Brixley know her husband would be back early? Was it really an unexpected visit? Zabia's attention was drawn to a nightstand with a slightly open drawer. She carefully pulled it out and found a stack of letters tied with a ribbon and a small photograph. In the photo, a young Brixley stood next to Jeremiah, his arm possessively draped over her shoulder. The girl was smiling, but her eyes were wary. Zabia went downstairs and approached the officer who was recording the neighbor's statements. Did anyone hear anything? Screams? Sounds of a struggle? The house next door is empty. The owners are in Europe. An elderly couple lives on the other side, but they're hard of hearing and were asleep. No one heard anything. Zabia nodded and looked again at the Ellisons' mansion. This house held secrets, and she felt that Paxton's confession was only the tip of the iceberg. The story of jealousy and betrayal may have been true, but it was not the whole truth. Something told her that behind the facade of the perfect family lay a much darker and more complicated story. She remembered her mentor's words. Every murder has 3 stories. The one the killer tells, the one the victim tells, and the truth. Your job, Zabia, is to find the third. Staring at the drop of blood slowly trickling down the marble step, Zabia vowed to herself to find the truth hidden behind Paxton Ellison's confession. Brixley Parker sat across from Zabia in the cold interrogation room at the Dan Woody police station. The morning had just begun, but the circles under the woman's eyes spoke of a sleepless night. Her elegant business suit looked out of place in this sterile environment, like a silk butterfly caught in a jar of formaldehyde. Mrs. Allison, I understand you've had a difficult night, Zabia began, turning on the tape recorder. But I need to hear your version of events, from the very beginning. Brixley nervously ran her hand through her hair, which was pulled back in a messy bun. I already told the officers at the scene everything. I need to hear it again, with all the details. Brixley took a deep breath. I was working late that evening on some documents. Paxton wasn't due back from his business trip until the next day. Around 10 o'clock, I decided to stop by Jeremiah's office to discuss the details of a case. What case? Zabia interrupted her. Brixley hesitated. A corporate merger. Jeremiah was advising me, unofficially. We work for different firms, but he always gave me advice. Go on. We were talking in his office. He offered me a drink. I refused because I was pregnant, but he insisted that 1 glass wouldn't hurt. She lowered her eyes. Jeremiah was always persistent. When I refused a second time, he became aggressive. He said he had made my career and I owed him. Then he tried to kiss me. What did you do? I pushed him away, but he grabbed my arms. At that moment, Paxton walked in. He wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow, but his meeting was canceled. Brixley covered her face with her hands. It all happened so fast. Paxton yelled and lunged at Jeremiah. They fought. I screamed for them to stop. But you didn't intervene? I was in shock. They knocked over the whiskey table, papers scattered everywhere. Then Paxton grabbed the figurine and... Her voice broke. Zabia studied the woman's face intently. The story sounded plausible, almost perfectly matching Paxton's version. Too perfectly. Why did Paxton wait an hour after the incident to call emergency services? Brixley blinked. I don't know exactly. We were in shock. At first he tried to help Jeremiah, but it was too late. Then we just sat there. I was crying. Paxton was muttering something. It's all a blur. Zabia made a note in her notebook. Another discrepancy with the medical data. If Jeremiah was killed around 11 and the call came in at 2:15, then the gap was more than 3 hours, not 1. Tell me about your relationship with Jeremiah before this incident. Brixley straightened up, her professional lawyer's mask once again hiding her emotions. Jeremiah was my mentor at the beginning of my career. I did an internship at his firm 5 years ago. He noticed me, helped me, gave me advice. Through him, I met Paxton. Jeremiah arranged for you to meet? Yes. At a charity event for the Bar Association, he introduced us to each other and said we were a perfect match. A bitter smile touched her lips. In a way, he created our family. Zabia nodded. And how did your relationship develop after the wedding? Fine, professional. We sometimes met at family dinners, legal events. Paxton respected his grandfather very much. Jeremiah raised him after his parents died. Were there any incidents before that? Like yesterday? For a split second, fear flashed in Brixley's eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. No, nothing like that. Zabia leaned back in her chair. Mrs. Allison, I don't think you're telling me the whole truth. I don't understand what you mean. For example, why we found Jeremiah's handkerchief with your lipstick on it at the crime scene, or why the blood spatters at the crime scene don't match the version of the struggle that you and your husband described. Brixley paled, but she held her ground. I'm a lawyer, detective. I know my rights. If you're accusing me of something, I need a lawyer. I'm not accusing anyone yet, Zabiya replied softly. I just want to understand what happened at the Ellisons' house last night. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young officer peeked into the room. Detective Rossum, you have a visitor. He says it's urgent and concerns the Ellison case. Zabiya apologized to Brixley and went out into the hallway. A tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and expensive glasses was waiting for her at the reception desk. Detective Rossum? He held out his hand. Weston Kamani. I'm a close friend of Paxton Ellison's. In the witness room, Weston nervously drummed his fingers on the table. I only found out about what happened this morning from the news. I couldn't believe it. Paxton isn't capable of such a thing. He confessed, Mr. Kamani. That's impossible. Weston shook his head. You don't know him like I do. Paxton is the most level-headed person I've ever met. Even in college, when everyone else was losing their minds, he always kept his cool. Anyone can snap under certain circumstances. No, not him. Weston leaned forward. Listen, Paxton called me yesterday around 10 o'clock. He said his meeting had been canceled and he was coming home to surprise Brixley. He was completely calm, happy even. He talked about the baby, about how he couldn't wait to be a father. Zabiya made a note. He called you from Boston at 10? No, from Atlanta. His plane landed around 8. This didn't match the statements of either Paxton or Brixley, who claimed that he had returned home and immediately found his wife with his grandfather. What else did he say? That he wanted to buy flowers and champagne on the way. Weston paused. But there was one strange moment. He asked if I had noticed anything unusual between Brixel and his grandfather. And what did you say? I told the truth, that on Paxton's last birthday I saw them arguing. Jeremiah was saying something quietly to her and she looked frightened. When I approached, they immediately fell silent. Weston ran a hand over his face. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just some work-related disagreement. They're both lawyers, after all. Was there anything else? Jeremiah has always been domineering, especially with women. Weston grimaced. There were rumors in Atlanta's legal circles that he used his position to obtain certain services from young female employees, but those were just rumors. Zabiya asked a few more questions and soon released Weston, taking his promise to stay in touch. This new information forced her to look at the case from a different angle. If Paxton knew or suspected something about his grandfather and his wife before returning home, the murder may not have been a spontaneous act of rage, but a premeditated one. Returning to her desk, Zabiya began to study the financial history of all the participants in the drama. Computer analysis revealed a strange pattern. Over the past 3 years, Jeremiah had transferred more than $300,000 to Brixley's account in small amounts. All transfers were marked as consulting or fees. Even more interesting was a transfer of $50,000 made just a week ago. On the same day, Brixley withdrew $30,000 in cash. Zabiya leaned back in her chair, piecing together the mosaic of scattered facts. The story was becoming increasingly murky. Jeremiah's influence and power, Brixley's financial dependence, Paxton's suspicions, all of this painted a picture much more complex than a simple act of jealousy. After lunch, Zabiya visited the detention center, where Paxton was being prepared for transfer to the county jail. When he was brought into the visiting room, she was struck by the change in him. Instead of a shocked, confused man, she saw a composed, determined man sitting in front of her. "How is Brixel?" he asked first. "She needs peace and quiet in her condition." "She's fine as far as possible," Zabiya replied. "Mr. Ellison, I want to clarify a few points in your confession. I told you everything last night." "Not everything. For example, why did you call your friend Weston at 10 o'clock in the evening, an hour before the alleged murder, and ask about the strangeness in the relationship between your wife and her grandfather?" Paxton tensed. "I don't remember making that call. Your phone says otherwise." Zabiya showed him the call log. 10:02. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. "I was upset, I don't remember much," Paxton repeated stubbornly. "You already suspected something, didn't you, before you came home?" Paxton turned away toward the wall. I killed my grandfather in a fit of rage. That's all that matters. How do you explain the fact that Jeremiah transferred more than $300,000 to your wife over the last 3 years? This was clearly news to him. His eyes widened, his Adam's apple jerked. There must be some explanation. Professional collaboration. Between a retired prosecutor and a corporate lawyer? Not very likely. Zabiya leaned closer. Mr. Allison, I think you're trying to protect someone. That's ridiculous. I confessed to murder. What protection is there? The door to the room opened, and the officer brought in Brixley. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she stood up straight. When she saw Paxton, she froze, her hand instinctively falling to her stomach. 5 minutes, Zabiya said, leaving the couple alone but continuing to watch through the one-way glass. They were silent for a moment, just looking at each other across the table. Then Paxton said quietly, "How are you?" "How can I be?" Brixley's voice was bitter. "You're in prison. Jeremiah is dead and I—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Everything will be fine. I'll take care of it." "How, Paxton? How are you going to take care of everything from prison?" He reached across the table, trying to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "After everything?" "Because I love you." His voice was soft but firm. "And our child." Brixley flinched. "Don't, please don't." "Listen to me." Paxton leaned closer. "They'll find the phone, the one you hide in your jewelry box, with the messages." Zabiya couldn't hear Brixley's response. She whispered something in Paxton's ear. His expression changed. For a moment, anger flashed across his face, then determination, and finally, humility. "I'll still protect you," he said louder, "no matter what happens." When visiting hours were over, Zabiya noticed that Brixley had left a napkin on the table. Moving closer, she saw the words written in lipstick. "He knows everything. Check your phone." Returning to the Ellison mansion, now cordoned off with police tape, Zabiya headed straight for the owner's bedroom. The jewelry box was on the dressing table, an antique mahogany piece with inlays. At first glance, it contained only jewelry, but upon closer inspection, Zabiya discovered a false bottom. There lay a simple push-button phone, an old model that could not be traced. Turning it on, she saw dozens of messages between a number saved as IE and Brixley. The first ones dated back to last year and were innocent, work issues, family matters. But gradually, the tone changed. "You belong to me, remember that," Jeremiah wrote 3 months ago. "I created you. I can destroy you," a message from last month. "If Paxton finds out the truth, it will destroy him. Is that what you want?" A week ago. And the last message, sent on the day of the murder. "Today, 10 o'clock. Don't be late. I have an offer you can't refuse." Zabiya scrolled through Brixley's replies, polite at first, then pleading, and finally desperate. "Please stop this. I can't live like this anymore. This has to end." The last message, sent at 9:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, was simple. "I'll come, but just to talk." Zabiya studied the phone carefully, finding more and more evidence of a long, complicated relationship between Brixley and Jeremiah. A relationship that had long since gone beyond the professional or familial. A relationship based on control, manipulation, and fear. The case was taking a new turn. Paxton's story of spontaneous rage seemed more and more like a cover for something much darker. But the question remained, if he didn't kill Jeremiah, then who did? And why was he so desperate to take the blame? Zabiya Rossum sat in her office, spreading out the evidence and photos from the crime scene in front of her. 3 days had passed since Jeremiah Ellison's murder, and the picture was still unclear, like a puzzle with missing pieces. She reread the messages from Brixley's secret phone. She leafed through the financial reports. She studied the crime scene photos for the 10th time. Something didn't add up. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Ramirez, the forensic expert, stood in the doorway with a folder in his hands. "I have the results of Jeremiah Ellison's full autopsy," he said, sitting down across from Zabiya. "And they're interesting." He laid out photos and diagrams on the table. "Look at the trajectory of the blow." His finger traced a line on the photograph of the wound. The blow was delivered at an angle from top to bottom and from left to right. assuming that Paxton and Jeremiah were facing each other. As stated in the testimony, such a trajectory is unlikely, especially considering that Paxton is right-handed, Zabiah said thoughtfully. Exactly. In addition, the doctor continued, the nature of the injury indicates that the blow was delivered by a person with less physical strength than a man of Paxton's age and build. One precise blow to a vulnerable spot, rather than a series of powerful blows that one would expect from a man in a fit of rage. Are you suggesting it could have been a woman? I'm not drawing any conclusions, Detective. I'm just pointing out the facts. Ramirez shrugged. But if you're asking for my professional opinion, yes, this injury is consistent with a blow delivered by a woman, especially if the victim had his back or side turned to her. Zabiah nodded, making notes. This information confirmed her growing suspicions. There's something else, Ramirez added, pulling a sheet of test results from the folder. Alprazolam, a benzodiazepine tranquilizer, was found in Jeremiah's blood, a fairly high concentration. Was he under the influence of a sedative? Not just a sedative. Combined with the alcohol that was also present in his blood, the effect could have been significant. Drowsiness, slowed reactions, disorientation. Not the kind of state in which a person actively participates in a fight. Zabiah thanked the expert and, left alone, reviewed her understanding of the events of that night. Now she had little doubt that Paxton was protecting someone, and that someone was Brixley. She dialed a number and requested a search warrant for Jeremiah Ellison's personal files at his law firm. Then she called Weston Kamani and asked him to come to the station immediately. Weston arrived an hour later, visibly nervous. He sat down across from Zabiah, fiddling with the sleeve of his expensive shirt. Mr. Kamani, Zabiah began, I need all the information you have about the relationship between Jeremiah Ellison and Brixley Parker. Weston shifted in his chair. I've already told you everything I know. No, you haven't. Zabiah placed a printout of messages from Brixley's secret phone in front of him. These messages indicate a long and complicated relationship between them. Blackmail, threats. I think you knew more about this than you're letting on. Weston stared at the messages for a long time, then gave up, his shoulders slumping. I suspected it, but I wasn't sure. He sighed deeply. About 6 months ago, at a company party, I overheard a conversation between them. Jeremiah threatened to ruin Brixley's career if she wasn't grateful. At the time, I thought he was talking about some kind of legal services, but the tone... Weston shook his head. It was the tone of an owner, not a mentor. Did you tell Paxton? Not right away. I didn't want to destroy their family with speculation. But 2 weeks ago, Paxton called me, very upset. He said he had found strange transfers to Brixley's account from Jeremiah. He asked if I knew anything about it. Weston looked Zabiah straight in the eye. I told him what I had heard. Paxton was shocked. He said he'd look into it. And on the night of the murder? What exactly did he say on that call? That he was coming home early to talk to Brixley. That he would clear everything up. He sounded determined, but not aggressive. Not like a man who was about to kill someone. Zabiah nodded. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Do you think Paxton knew about Brixley's pregnancy? That the child might not be his? Weston raised his head sharply. What? No, that can't be. He was so happy about the baby. Mr. Kimen, I have evidence that the relationship between Jeremiah and Brixley began long before she met Paxton. It's quite possible that the child is Jeremiah's. Weston paled. My God. That explains... He fell silent. What does it explain? What? At that company party, when Brixley announced her pregnancy, Jeremiah looked strange. Not just like a happy future great-grandfather. He looked at her with a kind of possessive satisfaction. I chalked it up to his ego. His empire would continue. But now... Zabiah let Weston go after getting a promise that he would be available for further questions. She was sure he had told her everything he knew. After lunch, she got a call from Jeremiah's law firm. The search had yielded results. A folder with documents related to Brixley had been found in Ellison's personal safe. Among them was a mentoring agreement signed 5 years ago, with clauses that resembled a slave contract more than a professional agreement. There was also a copy of Brixley's birth certificate, with the name of her real father, which differed from the one listed in her official documents. By evening, Zabia had requested a meeting with Paxton and Brixley at the same time. Now she was sure she knew the truth, and she wanted to hear it from them. In the interrogation room, the Allisons sat side by side, but there was tension between them. Paxton looked exhausted after several days in prison. Brixley looked pale and wary. "I've gathered enough evidence to reconstruct the events of that night," Zabia began, laying folders of documents on the table. "And it doesn't match the version you both told me." Paxton and Brixley exchanged glances. "I don't understand what you're talking about," Brixley said, but her voice trembled. "Let me tell you what I think happened," Zabia continued. "Jeremiah Ellison met you, Brixley, 5 years ago when you were a young, ambitious lawyer. He offered to be your mentor, but quickly turned that relationship into something more. He controlled you, manipulated you, perhaps even coerced you into intimacy." Brixley lowered her eyes, not denying it. "Then he introduced you to his grandson, Paxton, perhaps as a way to control you even more. You got married, but Jeremiah didn't let go. He continued to blackmail you, threatening your career and your marriage." Zabia turned the page in her notes. "When you got pregnant, the situation became more complicated. The child was Jeremiah's, wasn't it?" Brixley gasped. Paxton clenched his fists, but showed no surprise. He already knew. "That night," Zabia continued, "Paxton didn't catch you off guard. He came back early on purpose, suspecting your meeting with Jeremiah. He already knew or guessed about your relationship with his grandfather. Weston had told him about his suspicions 2 weeks earlier." "That's not true," Paxton said quietly. "It is true, and you know it." Zabia turned to Brixley. "You went to Jeremiah that night because he called you. Alprazolam was found in his blood. Did you slip the tranquilizer into his whiskey to make the conversation easier? Or did you have something else in mind?" Brixley was silent, her face a mask. "What happened next? Did he threaten you? Threaten the child?" "He said he would take my child," Brixley said suddenly. Her voice was quiet but firm. "He said it was his heir, his blood, that I was just an incubator, that after the birth, he would get full custody using his connections in the court system, that he would prove the child was his." Paxton reached out to take Brixley's hand, but she pulled away. "When Paxton showed up," she continued, "Jeremiah laughed. He told him the truth, everything, about us, about the baby." Her voice trembled. "He enjoyed it, destroying our family." "And what did Paxton do?" "He was in shock. He just stood there." Brixley looked at her husband with pain and gratitude. "And then Jeremiah said he would get rid of Paxton, that he was a hindrance, that without him it would be easier to control me and the child." "He grabbed Brixley's arm," Paxton said for the first time. "I rushed toward him, but he pushed me away. I fell. He was strong for his age. Jeremiah turned his back on me," Brixley continued. "He started threatening Paxton again. He said he would destroy his career and kick him out of the house, and then..." She took a deep breath. "He said he would make me get rid of the baby if I didn't obey him, that he wanted an heir only on his terms. And then you grabbed the figurine and hit him," Zabia finished. Brixley nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to shut up, to stop threatening my child, my husband." She looked at Paxton. "I didn't want you to know the truth, about Jeremiah and me, about the baby. I was afraid you would hate me." "I offered to take the blame," Paxton said. "I knew the jury would be more likely to believe self-defense if I was the defendant, rather than a pregnant woman who attacked an elderly man." "And you decided to fabricate a story about how you caught them together," Zabia concluded. "But the evidence tells a different story. The trajectory of the blow, the tranquilizers in Jeremiah's blood, the lack of struggle marks on Paxton, the time inconsistencies." "What happens now?" asked Brixley, her voice barely audible. Zabia closed the folder with the documents. "I'll present all the facts to the prosecutor. Given the circumstances, the prolonged psychological terror, the threats, and the fact that the blow was struck at a moment when you feared for your life, your husband's life, and your unborn child, there are grounds to consider this self-defense or, at worst, involuntary manslaughter in the heat of passion. And Paxton? He will most likely be charged with obstruction of justice and perjury. but given the circumstances, he will probably receive a suspended sentence. 3 weeks later, Brixley stood before the Fulton County judge. She was charged with involuntary manslaughter, but given the circumstances and her impeccable reputation, the sentence was lenient: 5 years probation and 1,000 hours of community service. Paxton received a year's probation for attempting to take the blame. Leaving the courtroom, they held hands. Ahead of them lay a long road to recovery, of their marriage, their trust, their lives. But they had decided to walk it together. In her office, Zabiya Rassam closed the Ellison case. She thought about the dark web of dependence and control that Jeremiah had woven around Brixley over the years. She thought about how power and privilege had allowed him to manipulate people like pawns on a chessboard. And she thought about Paxton's decision to defend the woman who was carrying his grandfather's child, a decision based on love, not revenge. Zabiya remembered the words Brixley had said to her after the verdict. "I had been in a cage for so long that I stopped seeing the bars. It was only when Jeremiah threatened my child that I finally saw them and broke them." Closing the last folder of case files, Zabiya thought that sometimes it takes an act of desperation to break free from a cage, and that even in the darkest stories, there can be a glimmer of hope.